The 20th entry in our ongoing series of the best movie you've never seen is 1995's Mr. Holland's Opus, featuring Richard Dreyfuss in an Oscar-nominated performance.
Richard Dreyfuss stars in the movie critics are calling one of the year's 10 best pictures.
What kind of music do you like to listen to? Rock and roll?
It's the powerful story of the hope one man inspired.
It has come to my attention that you are teaching the students rock and roll.
I will use anything if I think it'll help teach a student to love music.
The challenges he faced.
There's something wrong with Cole. I don't think he can hear.
And the dreams he chased.
If you have the passion, then you ought to do what you want to do.
You care more about teaching other people than you do about me.
Of all the lives he changed,
I would like to dedicate this song to my son.
the one he changed the most was his own. Siskel and Ebert give it 2 thumbs up. Richard Dreyfuss, Mr.
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not-So-Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Sunday afternoon here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. The 20th entry in our continuing series of the best movie you've never seen. In today's film, I would say that some young boomers, reasonable percentage of Generation Xers, a few elder millennials will have seen this film. But my sense is, despite the fact that it was a significant box office hit, being released in the 1995-96 winter season, it's a film that has unfortunately been largely lost to history. Despite its quality, despite the fact that it gets into a lot of topics that have been argued forever and will continue to be argued in terms of, from an educational perspective, what's really necessary and what are things we can trim out of the school budget. The movie is 1995's heartwarming, uplifting, but still somewhat gut-wrenching Mr. Holland's Opus. In an Oscar-nominated performance, its star, Richard Dreyfuss. 20 years earlier, had famously been Hooper in Steven Spielberg's Jaws, one of the handful of movies which changed the movie business. And Richard Dreyfuss was nominated for and won an Oscar a couple of years later for the movie The Goodbye Girl. And the famous story, because Dreyfuss had been around for a number of years, he did films such as, American Graffiti, of course, George Lucas, but he did a movie, The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, in I think 1973, and he's the lead, and it is a really good role because his character's a fucking asshole. Like, he's a really lousy guy, and we go the entire movie thinking that he's okay. Nah, not really. But Dreyfuss had been around for a number of years. He was an established name, wasn't a huge megastar, but on the strength of the movies I just said, Jaws, Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, American Graffiti, he was a name. He wasn't a guy who was a TV star and then starred in a big movie and all of a sudden he's nominated for Best Actor. You wonder why I'm giving you this wind-up. One of the other people nominated for Best Actor in the year that Richard Dreyfuss won for The Goodbye Girl was John Travolta in what is now a very, very dated film, Saturday Night Fever. Now, if we go back, if we rewind the clock, do I think that Richard Dreyfuss should have won Best Actor for The Goodbye Girl? No. I like his performance. It's Marsha Mason's movie. She was nominated. She didn't win. John Travolta is electrifying. He is fantastic. My hair. It takes me a long time to do it. He hits it. He hits my hair. It's a great performance. John Travolta, though, tells a story. At those Oscars, Sylvester Stallone was on stage to give the award for Best Actor. Man, Stallone was flying about as high as you can fly. The success of Rocky, and he's a young guy, he's 30, 31 years old, and he's on stage, and Muhammad Ali, the real Apollo Creed, comes out on stage and they shadow box. Amazing. But Sylvester Stallone was trying to add a little bit of character and a little bit of flavor to his announcement of the winner for Best Actor. And rather than simply open the envelope and say the Oscar goes to Richard Dreyfuss for the Goodbye Girl, Sly did something that nowadays I don't think he would have done. He opens the envelope and he goes, the Oscar goes to that new, young heavyweight. And John Travolta said when he heard the phrase, that new, young heavyweight, he had about a second and a half of pure elation. Because there was no one else in the category who was a new, young heavyweight except John Travolta. Vinnie Barbarino himself from Welcome Back, Kotter, and now a movie star. That new, young heavyweight, Richard Dreyfuss. And he didn't mean to, but it was as if Sly stuck Travolta with a shiv. Now, I believe that Richard Dreyfuss's best movie acting, his finest film performance, his most well-rounded character in which he was fully committed and had the support of incredible craftspeople around him, is the performance he gives in Mr. Holland's Opus. So Mr. Holland's Opus is a film that I was aware of for a couple of months, and it got what, at least at the time, in the day of the 90s, and I know the 80s and 70s, but especially in the 90s, it had a run-up to a very small release at the end of 1995, and the plan all along was that it was going to have a wide release sometime in January of 96, which, as I've said, that is typically a soft period at the box office. And if you have Oscar bait kind of film, such as Mr. Holland's Opus was always intended to be, those kinds of movies, if you release in the summer, might get lost in the shuffle. But if you put them out at the right time in January or February, they're going to find an audience. And Mr. Holland's Opus opened in about 2 theaters, not much more, maybe like one in New York City and one in Los Angeles, on December 29, 1995. Coincidentally, my 22nd birthday. I would have wanted to see it in theaters immediately. I thought the preview looked really interesting, and there was already buzz building, still, at least for me, the pre-internet era. I knew a number of people in college, I would say at least a third to a half of fellow New York University students, especially those who lived on campus. I didn't. But many of them were already on the internet and they were interacting with others, and it was still somehow beyond me. I really wasn't that enthused. Oh, I got to get on the internet. Let's get a dial-up modem, you know. But the word was the makeup department did yeoman's work, that they were so good, and maybe part of it is that Richard Dreyfuss has a certain kind of a face. It's different actors and actresses. It's more difficult to believably de-age and age. And I'm not talking about CGI, The Irishman, where the work on De Niro and Pesci and Big Al, it didn't quite come off, and Harrison Ford and Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny was a lot better, but still you're looking at a cartoon character, kind of, even though it looks like young Harrison. But there was chatter that the makeup work on Richard Dreyfuss was so good. If you didn't know who he was, if this was an unknown actor, you would think, what did they do? Shoot this movie over a 30-year period? Like, that is how good the makeup work was. And I was excited to see the film. I like any movie set where it has to do with school and kids, because I was still in college at the time. So I remember seeing a preview promoting that the movie was coming out on my birthday, and I started to get excited, and then I realized it's not playing anywhere. Boo! So I had to wait a couple of weeks. But on January 16th, which I guess was a Friday, went to the movies at Sunrise Mall in Massapequa, the theater that just a couple of years later went the way of the dodo. And my mother and I saw it with a pretty packed house for a Friday, if memory serves. And I loved it. First frame to last. And the Newsday review was okay. I think they gave it 2.5 stars. They also said, it appears that Dreyfuss is going through the events of the story in real time. This is maybe the best makeup work since Citizen Kane. Now that's a reach. The best makeup work since Citizen Kane. But they meant the most believable aging of a lead performer since what they were able to do with Orson Welles 54 years earlier. High praise, but it shows that even though the critic, in this instance, I think it was John Anderson, was not altogether sold on the film, The craftsmanship was exemplary. And so the movie is basically about a really talented, ambitious, intense, and passionate, and driven, and motivated, blah, 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 kind of a guy named Glenn Holland. He is a musician, a composer, and he has a teaching credential. He's done some jingles for TV commercials. He's making money as a composer, as a musician. But he gets married, and unfortunately, Glenn Headley, who passed away not that long ago, is really good as his wife in the film. This is another one of those thankless roles that I've talked about, and especially people we've been watching this kind of thing for decades. The role of the wife in this sort of film is almost always a thankless role, but Glenn Headley is so resourceful. She makes the character seem more well-rounded than the character actually is. It's just pure talent from her. And I believe she was inspired by just how engaged Richard Dreyfuss was in the lead. You know, Dreyfuss had a number of hits. He was in Stakeout, which was a big hit in the 80s, and he's terrific in it. Down and Out in Beverly Hills. You know, he was a guy who kind of looked like, a little bit like Paul Newman. Doesn't look like Paul Newman as far as matinee idol, but their facial structure is a little bit similar, and there were moments where Richard Dreyfuss was playing lead roles as if he was a conventional leading man, which he most certainly is not. But talent-wise, never had to take a backseat to anybody. And even in that year alone, in 1995, came out at the same time, The American President with Michael Douglas, Annette Bening, a really, really good movie, Rob Reiner. And you see the range. Those movies were shot within a couple of months. And Dreyfuss plays a character that is so far afield. He is so much different than a Glenn Holland. If you watch those movies back to back, you say, this is a guy who was born to do this. Because he somehow knows this isn't in the direction. In this movie, he's giving a supporting performance. He's reacting and he's engaging differently. And in this movie, he's a lead. He's reacting and engaging differently. The guy was fantastic. But Glenn Holland, he gets married, and they're going to start a family. He needs to make more money. So he takes a stable teaching job, teaching music. He has a teaching credential, and he figures mistakenly that having a steady paycheck, there's nothing wrong with that no matter what the circumstances are. I'm not trying to go against that. But a steady paycheck will allow him to do what he really wants to do, which is to compose great music, to write the next great American symphony. This is someone who sees himself as another Aaron Copland, just for reference. Like, that's where he wants to go, what he wants to do, and who he wants to be like. And this movie really got to me as somebody who had just turned 22 and was still very, not so much confused, more scared. Because there are young people who are getting ready to graduate college, as I was, who are simply not sure what they want to do. And then there are others who are scared. And this movie, it's not that the movie scared me, but it spoke to me. Because here was a guy who was an established professional. He was making money doing something he loved, composing. But he wasn't making enough. And he got married, and with a kid coming, he had to do something else. He had to stray from what is most likely his best path. Because sometimes circumstances pull us in different directions. And who hasn't been there? If you've been here as long as me, who has not been at a point, multiple points, dozens of points, where we know what we want to do, where we want to go, but it's just not practical, viable, realistic. And Glenn Holland thinks taking a stable teaching job means he's going to have more time to compose. Oops. He has no time to compose because the stable teaching job takes up all of his time. And the truth is, even though there are people, we know this, that work 2 jobs and still manage to do something great on the side, for most people, it doesn't work that way. Because most people can't subsist on 2 hours of sleep or 3 hours of sleep. You have other things that you need to do that take priority as much as it hurts and as painful as it is. And so Glenn Holland, who isn't really that into it, not only becomes a teacher, he becomes a great teacher. He becomes more engaged in the lives of his students than he ever could have conceived of. And the movie leaves us with so many, I don't even want to say questions, but it makes us look at things differently, because there are levels of failure and success at different points in life. And the young Glenn Holland, the Glenn Holland age 25, age 30, where Richard Dreyfuss literally looks like he did in Jaws. And that's what I mean about the makeup work. It is so good, and however they chose to light it and the angles, there's no computer graphics here. He looks like Hooper in Jaws, just with different hair in the early sequences. That is how seamless the physical transformation of Richard Dreyfuss is in this film. It leaves us, though, thinking, the younger Glenn Holland, if he could see his future by deciding to become a teacher, mild spoilers, he would be aghast and horrified and say, oh my God, I have failed, because this was what I was supposed to do, and look at where I ended up. But people who do teach, who are teachers, whether you're a high school teacher, an elementary school teacher, or a professor, my understanding, I've known a lot of teachers, I know a lot of teachers, the satisfaction that you get from knowing you made a difference, you made a positive difference in the lives of many of your students, well, how do you quantify? How do you do this and say, material glory, material things, money, fame, versus a helping hand, pulling people up, inspiring people to do better, to do more, to become their best selves. Dreyfuss hits all of these notes, and there is a sad subplot where his son is deaf. Sorry for the spoiler. But it is a gut-wrenching sequence and parts of the film where he almost feels as if he has been singled out, if you want to get metaphysical, smited, whatever, because he, of all people, who loves music so deeply in the marrow, and my son can't hear. He can hear vibration, but he can't hear. And there are moments where Glenn Holland kind of becomes unlikable. Not monstrous, but unlikable. That he just can't accept this. He cannot accept that his son is deaf. And Dreyfuss plays these difficult moments. This would not be easy to navigate for any actor, but he plays them so well. The direction is very strong because they don't want him to seem like a cretin or ungrateful, but he's hurt deeply. But not so much that he comes around, but he reaches a rapprochement with himself and starts to see it differently. And the reality is, his son is a home run hitter who happens to be deaf, who happens to have difficulty hearing. And of course, as time has gone on, people with massive hearing loss, or in some cases who didn't have it in the first place, with cochlear implants, there are ways to at least make it easier for them to live close to a normal life. But this movie isn't really concerned with that part of it. It is the idea of what is success? How do we quantify it? And the way that Dreyfuss, as Glenn Holland, kind of comes all the way around. Maybe he didn't do what he thought he was destined for, but boy, has he done an awful lot. And what I mentioned at the jump here is the concept of the educational system and scholastics, curriculums, and what do you do and how do you figure out budgets and what is critically important to young people's education versus what do we not need. It's not something that I ever really thought about, because why would I? You're a kid going through school, or in my case, a kid going through school who was miserable every single day from the first day of nursery school until June 28th, 1992, when I graduated Massapequa High School. Every single day was bad. Some days were worse than others, but every day was a bad day, as far as I was concerned. And yeah, people kind of joke around with me because I've always said that any parent who talks, and I used to hear it all the time, about how much their kids love school, I don't know what they're putting in the water, or I don't know why your kid feels need to lie to you. But I gotta be honest, I don't know anybody, I don't remember a single person who came up the ranks to the class of 1992 who did not hate school, who did not find it to be horrendous, miserable, angst-ridden. We were all angst-ridden. But that's neither here nor there. I never thought about, from a larger scale, choices that school, departments, that school systems, communities have to make decisions on what are we going to have based on the budget. Are we on austerity, or did the budget pass? Yeah, I was aware of that stuff. But the idea of cutting music and cutting arts, or greatly trimming back, why would I have ever had to think about that? Well, this movie made me think about that a lot. And on the surface, without any prep or without any warning, if somebody said, what's more important, history, art, the arts, music, what's more important? I would have just immediately said, well, history. But as Mr. Holland says in this movie, if we don't teach kids about the arts, that's part of history. But if we don't teach them the importance of the arts, we're not doing our jobs. He's right. It's not something that I would have thought about, and now it is something that I think about. So if I'm asked a question at age 50, what's more important to a high school curriculum? History, popular culture, the arts, music. I'll tell you what's not more important than those: football team, baseball team, soccer team, ice hockey team. That's not more important. And school budgets, and in this film, they keep increasing the allocation for the football team at the expense of the arts department. And it really resonated with me. Even at age 22, my eyes were opened. So that's the thing. Some people would be sympathetic if they simply were absorbed material, were exposed to material that would open their eyes. And this movie was very eye-opening in that regard. And why would I have ever worried about budget being cut? We were on austerity briefly in Massapequa. If a favorite teacher or somebody that I cared about had been axed, yeah, it would have pissed me off. But I wouldn't have expected it. I wouldn't have been going in saying, geez, I hope nobody gets fired. When you're a kid, at least me, I wasn't thinking in those terms. The other thing, though, that this movie leaves you with, and this resonated most strongly with me, and for better or worse, informed enormous chunks of my existence after getting out of college, where I graduated about a year and a half after the events of the film is when I was, all done. New York University graduation, class of 97, Bill Cosby, commencement speaker. There's a line in I think it's a John Lennon song, but the line is something to the effect of, life happens when you're busy making other plans. And the line is repeated in this movie, and it means something different. It would mean something different early in the film as opposed to late in the film. Glenn Holland experiences the highs and lows, decades of life as a composer, as a teacher, an educator, as a father, and as somebody who is coming to the end of his career as a teacher. He had different plans for his life. What the movie leaves us with, the takeaway is, even though he didn't achieve his lofty goals, his life has not been in vain. His life hasn't been a failure. By any metric, his life has been a stupendous success. And the title of the movie, Mr. Holland's Opus, mild spoiler, he at the beginning would say, it's going to be the American Symphony by Glenn Holland. That will be my magnum opus. But it turns out his magnum opus are the students whose lives he enriched, the son he has connected with, the wife who has adored him, whom he loves. And he is grateful for the life that he has lived. That's his opus. For a movie that is really trying to pull very deeply at the heartstrings and could very easily be maudlin, treacly, sickly sweet, the film earns the lumps in the throat. This film earns its tears. Dreyfuss hits a home run. And Nicolas Cage won the Oscar for a very, very depressing and difficult movie called Leaving Las Vegas. Mike Figgis, terrific filmmaker. I don't love Leaving Las Vegas as a movie. I feel like the film is a little bit overrated, or at least it was at the time. I don't know what contemporary audiences feel for it now. I haven't looked. It's not the kind of movie that I would be looking up to see, hey, I wonder what contemporary movie reactors think of Leaving Las Vegas from 1995. I am a huge Nicolas Cage fan. My issue is not that Nicolas Cage's performance is bad. It isn't. He's great. He gives every ounce that he has to the role of Ben in Leaving Las Vegas, but the character is one note. He announces at the beginning of the movie, I'm going to drink myself to death. Don't get in my way. Thank you. I'll be here all week. And that's it. That's the character. There's nothing else. Even though Cage says, well, there's bittersweet, I don't agree. Nick, love you. Great. You're amazing. You're a fucking genius. Happy you've made this incredible comeback. I don't agree with your take on that character. Richard Dreyfuss, in my opinion, gave the best performance by an actor for movies released in 1995. And he was not rewarded with the Oscar nomination. He did get nominated. So did Anthony Hopkins for Nixon. He's really good. Dreyfuss should have won the award. This is a great film, and it grossed more than 4 times its production cost. The budget was somewhere in the $22 to $25 million range, and the film went over $100 million worldwide, about 86 or 87 in the States, domestic. So it was a big hit. This is not the kind of film, even being released, as I said, in this sort of soft period in the year where this kind of prestige film, if it gets good reviews, as this movie did, is going to hit and people are going to go see it. It still exceeded expectations. If this film had grossed a total of between 50 and 60, people would have been happy with it. But instead it went over 100. And it is the kind of movie that people recommend to others. It had very good word of mouth then. And even now, this is a kind of film, if you're a person under 30 and you don't know this movie, haven't seen it, 100% guarantee you bring it up to an older relative, a parent, or someone you work with who is in my age bracket. It's almost a 100% certainty they are going to smile and say something to the effect of, I love that movie. Very confident in saying that. So Mr. Holland's Opus is actually streaming on Disney as we speak. If you happen to get Disney on streaming, you don't have to pay the $2 on Apple or Amazon. It is readily available. It was a Touchstone, Disney Touchstone production way back when. The 20th entry in our continuing series of the best movie you've never seen, Mr. Holland's Opus, starring Richard Dreyfuss and Glenn Headley. This has been episode 267 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Sunday afternoon here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, iTunes, or any of the other platforms we're on, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then.